you might be familiar with the concept of the hero's journey. Might be something you have never heard of before. So regardless of where you are standing on that front, I'm going to talk through what the hero's journey is, kind of where it came from, its key pieces and elements, and then how we apply that to literature and how we can then apply it to our own lives. Because we are all heroes of our own lives, right? Kind of leading the charge through what we do and what we endure and encounter and grow from. So, a brief history of the hero's journey. It is one of the oldest storytelling techniques in the world. We have an ancient, rich oral storytelling history, just as humans, dates back to all kinds of different ancient cultures. The hero's journey in particular really has its roots in ancient Greek storytelling. So this is a lot of Homer's, the Odyssey and the Iliad, these ancient, rich heroes and monsters and gods and goddesses and all that kind of good classic storytelling tends to follow the hero's journey. Because it's so ancient, it's pervasive. It has continued and carried through history, and it actually shows up in a lot of modern storytelling and kind of everything in between ancient and modern. It's dotted all throughout. So once you start to recognize its key elements, you'll see that it is used in books, in film, in poetry, kind of all across the board. Anywhere that you can tell a story, it might fall under this category of the hero's journey. So, to dive into what the hero's journey actually looks like, if you were to, go online, go to Google, type in the hero's journey, you would get a slew of different things. But they all share one thing in common. So the hero's journey is a circle, like I said, and it starts right up here at the top. And it moves, I gotta think about this, clockwise. It moves clockwise. So we're gonna go that way. So the very first feature of the hero's journey is, we have to kind of remember, the title gives it away. We're talking about a hero, so the main character of our story. And at the very beginning of that story, for that hero, we always begin at home. So this is the beginning place. For our hero, if we're thinking again back to kind of ancient Greek stories like I was talking about, it tends to take place where the hero was born, where they're currently living, whatever they consider to be familiar and known and comfy home area, right? Then something happens. And I know that's very, very vague, but it varies from story to story. The thing that happens, I tend to describe as the dragon attacking the town. It's some sort of event, some occurrence, something that gets the hero out of bed, off their butt, out into the world. Something has gone wrong, something has caused them to need to go on an adventure. So traditionally it's called this call to adventure. So that's our next piece. So that is our kind of next section that happens. This would be, if we're relating it to the annotating literary elements in the plot arc, this is the spark event, the thing that really gets the ball rolling, it gets the story started. All of the things that are occurring so far in the story are happening in the upper half of the circle, which gets this nice line across it. Everything up here is familiar and known. So we call this kind of, it's ordinary life, it's the regular world, it's the known world for our hero. So they're at home, something happens that gets them out of bed, off into the adventure, and the next thing that tends to happen is they meet someone. And this person tends to be a magical helper or a mentor figure. We tend to think about them as like the old wizard kind of character. Sometimes they can be a little gruff, a little, kind of unnerving. They're mysterious, but they ultimately help our hero. Throughout the story, once our hero meets the mentor, they tend to be forging a relationship with them. They tend to be guiding them, really leading them along. It's sometimes like the old teacher, maybe a father figure, maybe, like I said, this kind of magical wizard, mysterious magician type person. And the mentor tends to then help our hero gain a very important tool or weapon. These can be, it can be any sort of thing. Sometimes it's something physical, like this ancient sword that will help you defeat your enemy. Sometimes it's something a little less tangible, like the ability to do something. So you've learned a new skill or suddenly discovered that you have this thing at your disposal, this ability or this tool. So it falls kind of both under a weapon or a tool category. The thing that I say is most important about this weapon or tool is that it's special. That's like kind of this key thing to keep in mind, is that it's very, very special. It's not just any sword you picked up anywhere, or, you learned how to jump rope. Well, okay, everybody knows that now. No, it's something very, very specific, very, very special that the hero really starts to internalize, that this belongs to them, that they can become something because they have it. So that's kind of a key thing to remember. At this point, they have their mentor, they have their helper, they have their weapon or their tool or whatever it might be. They have reached this line. And what happens is our hero will cross the line. We sometimes call it crossing the threshold. And they move from what they know, from what is familiar, into the land of the unknown. This is where stuff becomes terrifying. It's unknowable. It's unfamiliar. It's sometimes, really scary. There's a lot of danger. It's unknown, right? There's no way of knowing what exactly is going to happen next. So our hero crosses this threshold into the land of the unknown. If we're referencing back to ancient Greek stories again, this is typically the line that happens between the mortal world and the underworld, which is actually very reflective of this circle. So we get kind of Earth happening up at the top, and then the underworld, or, the land of the dead, or whatever it might be, where you have to go and battle evil monsters, is actually under this line. So it's a dark place, right? It's kind of underground. Hence, kind of following that same visual, almost kind of visual metaphor that goes along with it. So while our hero is now in this land of unknown, they have to battle. This is where the real meat of the story tends to happen, is in this quarter. And this is called a lot of different things. If you look up, like I said, if you kind of look up different heroes' journeys, they'll call it different things. Tend to refer to it as challenge and danger. Sometimes it's called like the great ordeal or the trials. Basically we're saying there's battle, there's difficulty, there's stuff that the hero has to face. And it's not going to be pretty. That's kind of the point of this area. This is the great war that they have to fight when they meet their arch enemy, when they're face to face with danger. This is where it's happening. So they're going through this, they're wrestling with stuff, they're battling, they're fighting for their life, whatever it might be, and then they reach this bottom point. And again, we kind of have this visual metaphor that's happening with this whole circle, that we have this break between familiar and unfamiliar, we have this descent into this dark area, and then this is my absolute favorite label, because it's so dramatic, but this point down here is traditionally called the pit, which is like perfect, right? You're like, we're in the pit, here it is. If you can see that down there, the pit. I love it. I love telling my students that. They get really into it. They're like, ooh, yeah, the deep, dark pit. This is the worst point for the hero. This is the negative, the nadir, the crisis. If we relate it back to annotating literary elements, the plot arc, we refer to this as the crisis. This is the point of no return. The thing that happens that is heartbreaking, terrible, whatever it might be, the worst moment for the hero is when they are in the pit. We actually tend to see this, I think, in going back to that traditional Greek storytelling. A lot of times, if the mentor character, might be killed off in the story, that happens right there, right? If our hero is suddenly left alone and abandoned and whatever might be going wrong, that's right there, right? Any of this heavy emotion, heavy, dark feelings tend to be all in this pit. But it's not all bad. We know, going back to our visual metaphor, that we've reached the bottom, which means the only way to go is back out again. We have to come around, hence it being a circle. So despite the fact that we're wallowing in this really negative space for our hero right now, we have to keep going this way. And out of this darkness, out of I think somebody wrote the pit of despair, which is classic. Princess Bride is a great one to do with this tale. Awesome. But out of this pit of despair, out of this dark time, our hero is given the unique opportunity to grow and change. So our next point, our next element here is this idea of growth. Growth can be emotional, it can be mental growth, it can be knowledge, it can sometimes just be change that happens, physical change, right? If something, if you were fighting and you got your hand cut off or something, right, because you're fighting with a lightsaber against Darth Vader, you might get your hand cut off. That's physical change out of a really dark moment, continuing up our circle. The next piece, and this sometimes happens on the bottom side of the line, it sometimes happens on the top side of the line. It's kind of right around this threshold again. But this is where our hero has finally succeeded in their goal. They have achieved what they set out to achieve way back when they started on their adventure. Maybe they defeated the great evil that they were fighting. Maybe they found this thing that they were looking for. Whatever it is, they've finally reached the point where they have found the treasure or the reward. So sometimes, again, it comes in the form of something very physical, very tangible, like, you won, here's 1,000 pieces of gold in a box, congratulations, right? Or maybe they have finally achieved, peace in their, war-torn village, whatever it might be, right? So it's not always physical, not always obvious. Sometimes it's a little bit more intangible or a little bit more metaphorical. But either way, they're receiving a reward. So, like I said, sometimes happens below, sometimes happens above, but usually right around this reward spot is where our hero crosses back over this threshold and goes back out of the unknown and into the known. So they're into an area that is once again familiar, and this is the last piece of this journey. An area or a place or a feeling can become familiar because you're back home again. So sometimes you're just returning back to where you started. It can also become familiar because you're now used to it. You've created like a new normal or built a new life for yourself. So there's many ways that return can look. And it's more this returning to safety, returning to familiarity, to understanding, whatever it might be. Again, not always obvious. So this is our return. And this whole thing together is the hero's journey. Like I said, there are versions you can find out there that look a little different. There are some versions you'll find that have 42,000 points on them, and they're very, very detailed, and they're very, precise, and they have all these aspects. This is a little bit more general. It's got maybe 8, maybe 9, I don't know if I miscounted, 8 or 9 key elements to it. But part of the reason it's a little more general is then more stories will fit under this kind of way of looking at something. So, to help kind of give you a sense of that, because like I said, I've been speaking in generals here, is I thought I'd run through it relatively quickly with a story that most people are fairly familiar with, which is that of Star Wars. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I have been since I first saw, like, the original trilogy when I was young, and I remember going to see all the other ones in theaters. Very exciting. For the sake of what I'm going to be doing, we're going old school. We're going to talk about the original first Star Wars movie as this hero's journey. So, normally I'd want a little bit of I ask you a question, and if you have an answer, go ahead and type it in the chat. Because of the kind of time delay, it becomes a little harder. Oh, and a perfect line from Rogue One. I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me. That's my favorite line from Rogue One. Love it. Thank you for that. So, if we're thinking about Star Wars, and we're thinking about the original trilogy and the original first movie, our hero is, of course, none other than Luke Skywalker. So, if we think about where Luke begins the story, and where the story of Star Wars starts, is on Luke's home planet of Tatooine. He's familiar with it. He's honestly kind of tired of it, which is a pretty big red flag in terms of identifying whether or not this is a hero's journey type story. He's tired of being, a hydration farmer, I think. He's tired of working with his aunt and uncle. He wants to go be a pilot. He's sick of it, right? He's sick of the sand and the sun. He wants to go do something else. Something happens, and this is really worthwhile debating, because you could have a couple different answers about what is the thing that gets the story started for Star Wars. What is the thing that really launches Luke, that gets him on his adventure? One option, kind of I guess we think about the big violent thing that happens, is that Luke's aunt and uncle's farm is burned down and his aunt and uncle are killed. But even before that, R2-D2 shows up with a message from Leia. So we could argue that either one of those is kind of our spark event. And once he gets out of the house, once he goes off on his adventure, he meets somebody. And he meets a classic old hermit wizard. It is Obi-Wan Kenobi, our fabulous old wizard. Best Star Wars character, in my opinion. One of the best. But yes, he is our old wizard. He's our mentor. He's aloof, he's mysterious, he's magical. And he helps guide Luke in the right direction. So he really, really helps get him on his way. You can make an argument that he has some other helpers and some other mentors, including R2-D2, he kind of helps him along the way, as well as even Han Solo teaches him some stuff and helps guide him in a little bit of a different way, but still kind of helpful. You could make an argument, and those are really rich conversations to have with your kids about, who really is the mentor, or can we have more than one? And we certainly can. Okay, so from the mentor, we move to the tool, or the weapon. And again, Star Wars is this great example because it has a really clear, very special weapon that is given to Luke by Obi-Wan. So, Luke's newfound weapon is the lightsaber, right? And it was his father's even, which makes it even more special. That it was this very specific item that he's given, which is his father's lightsaber. And then Luke crosses the threshold. Again, a really clear division between being on his home planet, a place he knows and is bored of, to entering the rest of the galaxy, which is all unknown, unfamiliar, and terrifying. He then goes into, he has to battle Darth Vader, he has to battle the Empire, the entire Empire, right? He has to take on this whole thing, the Death Star. He goes into, dogfighting in space and lightsaber battles and this whole slew of dangers and challenges that he has to face. And then he reaches this bottom part, this pit. And if you remember, I frequently said that, I'd said one of the frequent markers of this dark place in our hero's journey sometimes is when someone close to the hero might be killed or taken out of the story in some way. So in the case of, this original Star Wars story, our poor fabulous Obi-Wan is killed by Darth Vader. And it's pretty epic. It's this, whole fight scene that they have. Luke watches, he sees it happen. And this is just this awful moment for him, right? This terrible, terrible thing he has to reconcile. He has to deal with. Which leads to him, in theory, having this opportunity to grow and change. So, he learns about the Force. He knows that it's out there. He becomes, excited about pursuing becoming a Jedi. He realizes that there's this bigger problem that needs taken care of, right? He can't just hang out on Tatooine and ignore the rest of the galaxy. He has to go do something about it. So that's kind of, he gets his growth in a couple ways, right? His reward is he finally succeeds at what his goal is, or at least part of his goal. If we think about, again, in that first Star Wars movie, they have the whole attack on the Death Star, and they actually succeed, right? Spoilers, I should have said that. If you haven't seen the first Star Wars, spoiler alert, but they manage to succeed. They blow up the Death Star. That's pretty big reward, right? Defeating the evil empire. And then they actually receive a physical, literal reward at the end. They're given medals of honor and accolades, and they have a whole parade and a whole big party, right? So he gets kind of both a literal reward and more of this, like, finding peace and bringing, a cure from evil to the whole galaxy. And then at the end, this sort of last piece is his return. He doesn't actually return to Tatooine, right? He doesn't go home. He creates a new normal for himself. He becomes excited about becoming a Jedi. He knows he has to go and find the Jedi Master Yoda. He has kind of this whole new adventure that he's setting up for himself, which is sometimes what happens when we get back to this home space or we've returned. So I realized that was kind of a quick run through of with Star Wars specifically, but I wanted to kind of anchor it in a real world example that I feel like a lot of people would be familiar with. I debated about doing it with Lord of the Rings, because another very popular story that a lot of people are familiar with. The trouble with Lord of the Rings, fabulous story, again, one of my favorites of all time, is that there are a lot of heroes to that story. So before you even go into this hero's journey, you have to really decide who is your hero, which is a great debate to have. Are you going to do it about Aragorn or about Frodo or about Sam? Any of the hobbits. Do it about Pippin or Merry. You could do it about Gandalf. He goes through a whole journey on his own. So it's very, very different depending on which hero you want to talk about. And they might not completely and totally fit the circle. It might be a little varied, or it might deviate in certain places, which is something to keep in mind. And again, really good foster for conversation, that it can, it's like, oh, we're following this person's story, but did they actually, receive a weapon? Well, I don't know. Let's debate about it. Did the story do this? I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's write about it. So really good opportunity there. If you're wondering, like, okay, what would be a good story to look at from this perspective? Does this movie or does this book actually fit the hero's journey before I get started? How can I tell? And the thing that I have found is one of the best indicators is kind of this right here. This crossing from known to unknown. If you have a place in the story where somebody leaves, they're in their home, they're in what's familiar, and they're going out. They're actually finding something new, right? It's very active. Tends to be a red flag for this might really fit the hero's journey circle really, really well. Because of that threshold crossing. So if you're like, oh, I just watched the movie WALL-E the other week. I love that movie. It's a great movie. And I was thinking, oh, does WALL-E fit the hero's journey? Well, does WALL-E leave? Does he actually leave what is familiar to him? And I will not answer that. If you haven't seen WALL-E, you should go watch it. But I was kind of thinking about this as, we do talk about it as literary analysis. It's good movie analysis as well, especially because you can sit down and watch a film together and then do writing and deep thinking, get familiar with this, and then use it to look at a book. So it's, a bit of a bigger project if you're looking at, reading a whole novel together, versus a movie is that more bite-sized that you can really have that conversation, kind of in one, like, mini lesson almost. So it's a good way to get familiar is by watching movies with it. And then that kind of third step that I talked about that I'm going to really just touch on, because I know I've kind of been at it for a little while here, but is this connecting it to our own lives. This is this third step, right? First we understand the concept, we understand the principle, then we apply it to stories, to literature, to movies, to music, whatever it might be, and then we go this third step of applying it to ourselves. That if I'm the hero of my own story, well, let's figure out what story I'm going through right now, right? Because at different points in your life, you're going through different stories. And if we're looking at the current global climate or something else that's going on in your life, it doesn't have to be something heart-wrenching. It doesn't have to be something terrible, but does it have maybe this known versus unknown kind of feel to it? Does it have something maybe a little challenging or dangerous going on? In terms of, maybe it's just such new territory that you really don't know how to feel. It's kind of, really makes you pause, right? And feels like a challenge going forward. Have you been given tools or skills or weapons? Maybe not literal weapon, maybe literal weapons, but maybe not literal weapons. But what are you armed with from the people around you, from your own life, from whatever it is you've experienced? What has that armed you with in particular that makes you prepared to enter this kind of thing? I'm kind of moving backwards through the circle a little, but you can, you don't have to look at it in order. Do you have a mentor or a helper? Do you have several mentors and helpers? That would be amazing, right? Who are the people in your life that guide you, right? That provide you with the insights and the abilities to then take the next step and the next step and the next step, right? And if you're talking about one story, it might be one helper. If you're talking about a different story, it might be a different helper, right? With a certain experience you're going through, maybe it's your friend who is really your mentor helper, and a different one, it might be your mom or dad, who is the person you're really depending on to help you through something. So, I think this is great, especially to do in your own life, as adults, as the people who are expected oftentimes to be the mentor, to be the helper, to look at your own journey and your own experiences and what's your pit. I know it's not fun to talk about. This is fun to talk about. Growth and experience, that's good. But we got to have that pit first, right? And so really, really engaging and realizing what that is and what, maybe you're in the middle of it, I don't know. But if you're on the other side of it, what experiences you can really take away from that. And then helping your kids be able to look at a certain experience in the same way, and really pull great writing and doing it on Post-it notes and doing it in paragraphs or in phrases and whatever, capacity you want to be writing in, but really getting that on paper can really help kind of not only teach the tool, but really help consolidate and wrap your own head around kind of all the things that are going on. So sort of an interesting note to end on, kind of has a melancholy ring to it, but I hope you guys have really enjoyed I'm out of breath because I love this kind of stuff. This is what gets me fired up. This is my passion. And I love teaching it. So I'm very excited to have the opportunity to do that and to bring this information to you. There are not specific examples in that Hero's Journey download, but there are sort of generalized examples that can help you kind of pinpoint what might be good. And, if you come up with any, let us know, right? We want to know if you did it on something that was expected or unexpected. We really want to know that. We're excited. We like to do it with our students. We like to do it ourselves. So let us know how stuff goes. But, this is great.